in a red, it must be just as much south as north, just as much along the Pacific as Atlantic, in the valley of the Mississippi in Canada, up in Maine, down in Texas, and on the shores of Puget Sound. In other words, it's fascinating. He says, I want to be the poet for all of America. And now to finish. From another point of view, Leaves of Grass is avowedly the song of sax and amativeness and even animality, though meanings that do not usually go along with those words are behind all and will duly emerge, and all are sought to be lifted into a different light and atmosphere. Of his feature, intentionally palpable in a few lines, few, right? I shall only say the espousing principle of those lines so gives breath of life to my whole scheme that the bulk of the pieces might as well have been left unwritten were those lines omitted. In other words, he's making the argument from what Emerson and others had said. Dude, you got to get rid of some of these more crazy sexual lines. And he said, no, getting rid of that would ruin everything about Leaves of Grass. Difficult as it may be, it has become, in my opinion, imperative to achieve a shifted attitude from superior men and women towards the thought and fact of sexuality as an element in character, personality, the emotions, and a theme in literature. It's a compelling line. In other words, he is predicting the liberation that would, of course, become the American literature of the 20th and now 21st century. I'm not going to argue the question by itself. It does not stand by itself. The vitality of it is altogether in its relations, bearing significance, like the clef of a symphony. We'd think proud music of a storm, huh? At last analogy, the lines I allude to and the spirit in which they are spoken permeate all Leaves of Grass, and the work must stand or fall with them as the human body and soul must remain as an entirety. In other words, don't think that you can jump into Leaves of Grass and start excising lines or poems and saying, now we've got a real collection of poems. He said it won't work. Universal as are certain facts and symptoms of communities or individuals all times, there is nothing so rare in modern conventions in poetry as their normal recognizance. Literature is always calling in the doctor for consultation and confession, and always giving evasions and swathing suppressions in place of that heroic nudity. And then he gives a little note here, 19th century, July 1883, on which only a genuine diagnosis of serious cases can be built. And in respect to editions of Leaves of Grass in time to come, if there should be such, I take occasion now to confirm those lines which the settled convictions and deliberate renewals of 30 years, and to hereby prohibit, as far as word of mine can do so, any elision of them. In other words, leave it alone. By the way, our Nortons will say that is since 1858, when sex and amativeness became dominant in the Children of Adam and columnist clusters, even to his benefactor Emerson, who argued against including the outspoken children in Leaves of Grass 1860, and to later critics, including those who banned the 1881 Boston edition. Whitman gave substantially the same defense of these poems as he gives above, and we've commented on it in our study. Then still, a purpose enclosing all, and over and beneath all, ever since what might be called thought, or the budding of thought, again, the fact that he uses the word budding, right, fairly began in my youthful mind, a child went forth. I had a desire to attempt some worthy record of that entire faith and acceptance, and then in parenthetics, quote, to justify the ways of God to men is Milton's well-known and ambitious phrase, again, theodicy, which is the foundation of moral America. And here it comes. I argued, and this is one of the reasons I argued it, because I felt strongly that I was in good standing with what Walt would say. All of Leaves of Grass is a theodicy, the last of our big five. That is to say, why must there be terrible things that happen? Why must we have pain and suffering? Why can't we have panacea? Why can't there be just perfection of existence with no pain? Well, it's not a matter of why did it happen to us, but rather why did it happen for us, right? In other words, pain and suffering is propaedeutic. And he's going to play this one out now. He says, I felt all as positively then in my young days as I do now in my old ones. To formulate a poem, notice he doesn't call it poems, he says a poem, right? To formulate a poem whose every thought or fact should directly or indirectly be or connive of an implicit belief in the wisdom, health, mystery, I love that word, beauty of every process, every concrete object, every human or other existence, not only considered from the point of view of all, but of each. In other words, there's a meaning in the pain and in the suffering. While I cannot understand it or argue it out, I fully believe in a clue and purpose in nature, notice capitalized, entire and several, and that invisible spiritual results, just as real and definitive as the visible, eventuate all concrete life and all materialism through time, the capitalized. My book ought to emanate buoyancy and gladness legitimately enough, for it was grown out of those elements and has been the comfort of my life since it was originally commenced. What an amazing paragraph. There's his theodicy. Why did all this happen to me, not to me, but rather for me. Why did all this happen for me? No, not for, not just for me, but for all of us, right? Beautiful, brilliant. One main genesis motive of the Leaves was my conviction, just as strong today as ever, that the crowning growth of the United States is to be spiritual and heroic. Here it comes, guys. He's going to argue that there's something fundamental about being an American, and it has to do with being this idea of spiritual and heroic. To help start and favor that growth, or even to call attention to it, or the need of it, in the beginning, middle, and final purpose of the is the beginning, middle, and final purpose of the poems. In other words, that's why you did all this study, the heroic and the spiritual. In fact, when really ciphered out and summed to the last, plowing up in earnest the interminable average fallows of humanity, nor good government merely in the common sense is the justification and main purpose of these United States. An amazing aside. Isolated advantages in any rank or grace or fortune, the direct or indirect threads of all poetry of the past are, in my opinion, distasteful to the Republican genius and offer no foundation for its fitting verse. Established poems, I know, have the very great advantage of chanting the already performed so full of glorious reminiscences dear to the minds of men. But my volume is a candidate for the future. What a great line. All original art, says Tan, this is a quote from Tan, anyhow, is self-regulated, and no original art can be regulated from without. It carries its own counterpose and does not receive it from elsewhere, lives on its own blood, a solace to my frequent bruises and sulky vanity. As the present is perhaps mainly an attempt at personal statement or illusion or illustration, I will allow myself as further help to extract the following anecdote from a book, Annals of Old Painters, conned by me in youth. Rubens, the Flemish painter, in one of the wanderings through the galleries of old convents, came across a similar work. After looking at it thoughtfully for a long while and listening to the criticisms of his students, he said to the latter in answer to their questions as to what school the work implied or belonged, quote, I do not believe the artist, unknown and perhaps no longer living, who has given the world this legacy ever belonged to any school or ever painted anything, but this one picture, which is a personal affair, a piece out of a man's life. End quote. I have no chair, no church, no philosophy, is the way he says it in Song Myself 46. Now to finish. Leaves of Grass, indeed, I cannot too often reiterate, has mainly been the outcropping of my own emotional and other personal nature, an attempt from first to last to put a person, notice italicized, a human being, myself in the latter half of the 19th century in America, freely, fully, and truly on record. I could not find any similar personal record in current literature that satisfied me. And I love that. It's like, I looked for a book like this, I just couldn't find it, so I had to write it. But it is not on Leaves of Grass distinctively as literature, or a specimen thereof, that I feel to dwell or advance claims. No one will get at my verses who insists upon viewing them as a literary performance or attempt at such performance or as aiming mainly toward art or asceticism. In other words, it's more important than literature. I say no land or people or circumstances ever existed so needing a race of singers and poems differing from all others and rigidly their own as the land and people and circumstances of our United States need such singers and poems today and for the future. That's you guys, poets to come, right? Still further, as long as the states continue to absorb and be dominated by the poetry of the world and remain unsupplied with engraphic autochthonic songs to express, vitalize, and give color to and define their material and political success and minister to them distinctively, so long will they stop short of first-class nationality and remain defective. In other words, you want to make our nation a stronger nation, have us read Leaves of Grass, and then have us decide we need to go out and create new songs, new chants. Now to finish. In the free evening of my day, I give to you, reader, the foregoing garrulous talk. He loves that word at the end of his life, garrulous. Thoughts, reminiscences. And then a little line of poetry. As idly drifting down the ebb, such ripples, half-caught voices echo from the shore. Concluding with two items for the imaginative genius of the West. When it worthily rises, first, what Herder taught to the young Goethe, that really great poetry is always, like the Homeric and biblical canticles, the result of a national spirit and not the privilege of a polished and select few. In other words, it's always going to be about en masse. Second, that the strongest and sweetest songs yet remain to be sung. I love that the last word of it all is that he calls to all of us to say, we've got to find our songs. We've got to sing our songs. Now, how to go forward. Well, I think after reading an essay like this, we might want to go back and read all of Leaves of Grass as a test to say, okay, this is what he said he wanted to do. Did he pull it off? And of course, you're going to be the only one that can fully answer that for yourself. And the way you're going to know that the answer is yes is when you sit down to begin to write, after you've read a few lines of Whitman at the park or on the hill. Thank you.